What did he say you should take?
I have to what's it called?
Close enough. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another day of Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Today is the third day of the intermediate days of Sukkot. As we continue to celebrate Sukkot, we continue to increase in joy every single day. As we know, this is a festival of joy. And today we're going to talk about the concept of joy. As we know, in the time of the temples, as we discussed yesterday, there was a custom and there was a celebration which was called Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the celebration of drawing the water, when they would then pour the water on the altar, and all the Jews around, as we discussed yesterday in previous times, about this great celebration and to what extent it went, to the juggling and how the whole entire fire that everybody saw from all over, and what kind of unbelievable celebration it was. The Talmud uses a description and says one who has never experienced the joy at the celebration of the drawing of the water has never experienced joy in their life. Now, the Talmud is not just telling us historical events. The Talmud is telling us also contemporary application and a story that we can learn from this great celebration. If we don't have this celebration today, what is this applicable for us? Which takes us back to where this idea of the water libation comes from. The Talmud explains that when God created the universe, on the second day of creation, he separated the waters from above to the waters below. And the waters below complained, why should we be below? We want to be closer to God. We want to be above too. And God said, there will come a time that you too will be uplifted. And that will be when they pour the water on the holy altar by the celebration of the water libation. The Talmud asks an interesting question. You know, we talk about interfering with the way God created the universe. If you see a poor person who's destitute and doesn't have anything, why should you give him charity? Shouldn't you say, maybe God made him that way and therefore I shouldn't help him? What's my problem? And what does the Talmud explain? It says God created the world in a way that we, the human beings, should uplift everything that's there. Everything in the world is waiting for us, the human being, to be uplifted. And when the human being uplifts everything that's there, they too become uplifted. Starting from on the second day of creation. When on the second day of creation, when God created, so to speak, this division between the waters above and the waters below, and God said it will be you, the water below, that will rectify it and connect the waters above. Same ideas with anything. You know, there are different levels of life in this world. There's inanimate type of items, there's vegetation, there's animals, and then there's human beings. And every single one of them depend on the level below it. The level below it, for example, the animals depend on the earth, on the vegetation as they eat vegetation. The vegetation depends on the earth. Human beings depend on animals, vegetation, earth. But what is the objective of the human being? To uplift it, to make it something special, something great, to make it something of idea, that every single item that God created, to make it something unique and make it spiritual. This is the same idea when we talk about joy. What does it mean to be joyful? Being joyful, usually, why is a person happy? Is because they get an unexpected event that happens in their life, which causes them to be joyful. Something that they don't necessarily can explain. Generally, people don't get, wow, they get excited because the sun came up in the morning. They can explain every morning the sun comes up, so therefore they don't seemingly have that joy. Though there's no reason for it to be not to enjoy it. But joy generally comes from something which is unpredictable, or something that cannot be explained rationally. It is for that reason that it is said that joy breaks all boundaries. When we are truly joyful, nothing stands in our way. We can overcome any obstacle. And why is that? Back to what we mentioned before. The idea of joy is bringing together opposites, rectifying a past, repairing the world to something and bringing it to a higher level than it was beforehand. And the only way that can happen is when we are joyful. When we do a certain behavior, God reciprocates in kind. When we are joyful, God looks at us as joyful. And therefore, when we are joyful and we take things to a level beyond that we were able to make it, we then are able to repair the world to a level beyond rationale. If you look around the world, there are so many things happening, so many destructive things that one can point to. And sometimes there's no rationale, no explanation that we can give to why these things are happening. The only countermeasure that we can do to that is to also have a certain level of appreciation, which is above and beyond comprehension. And that's where joy comes in. When we are truly joyful, we then can overcome any obstacle standing in our way. Because the concept of an obstacle is a premeditated inhibition which a person puts within himself. An obstacle means that I have a certain thinking and liking towards certain types of things, and therefore I decided and concluded I'm not able to do, or I am able to do certain things. But if I put my logic aside and I go beyond my intellect, I can then accomplish much more, because then I go beyond the intellect. And that is the concept of joy. Joy comes to the individual when they're beyond intellect. Joy comes to a person out of an event in life which they were not expecting intellectually or calculated to happen. Joy helps us excel and brings us beyond any type of calculation. So here's the key. Here's what God's telling us during these 7 days as we celebrate the festival of Sukkot. The festival of the time when they celebrated this joyful time of the water libations. Number one is that this joy, by the pouring of the water, we are repairing the world, bringing everything to its elevated state. What is its elevated state? A state beyond intellect. A state of joy which cannot be comprehended or explained. A state of joy which is above and beyond. But the only rationale and connection is my actual subservience and connection to God. And here's where the key is. We know that because of our body, we have limitations. We know we are limited the way certain experiences that we have because of our body limitations. But when we go with our soul, then we are able to achieve and reach greater plateaus. This is what the Talmud tells us. The joy that they experienced by the water libation was a joy that was never, if one did not experience such a joy, you have not experienced joy in your life. Meaning that if your joy is a calculated joy, if your joy is a joy which is premeditated based on intellect, then you have not reached above and beyond. You have not repaired anything because you're still in the realm of what fits in your box. The joy that needs to be, as we know in the time of the Talmud, and the joy that came from the water libations, was a joy of repairing the world, was a joy of preparing and repairing, taking opposites and bringing them together. And that can only be achieved when we go beyond our intellect. Our soul is accustomed to going beyond its intellect. Our soul is something which is, by definition, beyond intellect. Our soul is what unites us and God. When we have this true joy beyond intellect, we then can tap into the deepest levels of our soul. We then can reach a level of our soul which is the utmost of its unity that it has with God. Therefore, the Talmud uses this terminology. One who has not experienced true joy. What is the definition of true joy? A joy that was experienced by the great celebration of the water libation. In fact, an interesting tidbit here. I'm sure you all remember Jonah and the prophets from the story of Yom Kippur, who was stuck in the fish. Do you know when he got his prophecy? By the celebration of the water libation, because that was an experience that was beyond intellect. This celebration, this concept of joy, helps us achieve to make from the physical world a spiritual oasis of God. And the only way we can do that is through joy. Through intellect, we'll say, well, look, I have so many obstacles. We're outnumbered. Materialism is way more powerful than spirituality, because that's a calculation based on intellect. Judaism teaches us in these 7 days of Sukkot, God tells us, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you have an obligation to rejoice. But what kind of rejoicing? A rejoicing that's inherent, a rejoicing that comes from the soul, a rejoicing that's going to repair the world, a rejoicing that will bring about true peace and tranquility between heaven and earth, a rejoicing that will bring about an absolute unity between man and God, a rejoicing which is above and beyond intellect can ever comprehend. So as we go now from these days of Sukkot, and we move into the days of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, days which are dedicated to absolute joy with the Torah, let us put on our dancing shoes. Let us get involved. Let us have that absolute joy, a joy from helping another person, a joy from being connected spiritually with God, a joy with making this world a better place, a joy that goes beyond our intellect, a true inherent and resolute joy. Then we will truly be happy and celebrate this holiday as it's meant to be, and we will find solace, peace, and joy within ourselves and with the people around us. And God will reciprocate in kind, giving us joy, happiness, and peace, to the ultimate joy with the coming of Mashiach. May it be now. God bless you. Have a good Yom Tif, a good Moed. I'm looking forward to celebrating and continuing our discussion tomorrow at 1 p.m.